As promised, we are back with the new Statesman podcast from Labour Party conference, dissecting the Prime Minister, the leader of the Labour Party, Keir Starmer's speech.
I will not let Tory economic recklessness hold back the working people of this country. And let me tell you something else I won't let happen. I will never let a minority of violent, racist thugs terrorise our communities. An NHS facing the future, more security and dignity at work, town centres thriving, streets safe, borders controlled at last, clean energy harnessed for national renewal, new homes, new towns, new hospitals, roads and schools, a new future for our children. That is what people will get, and mark my words, we will deliver it.
Andrew, you were brimming with positivity after Rachel Reeves, the Chancellor's speech yesterday. Are you sharing that for your assessment for Keir Starmer just as positive?
Not entirely. What I thought was, it's a good rule in politics that when everyone says something, everyone says this, everyone says that, then almost always everyone is wrong. And I was part of everyone saying that Keir Starmer absolutely had to give a sunlit uplands, sun on the Mersey, bright, optimistic, sound of trumpets kind of speech to mitigate the gloom of the Rose Garden speech. And I felt it was entirely the opposite. It was a very dark speech, very serious, very closely argued, but there was passion there. The passion was anger. It was fury about the inheritance left to him by the Conservative Party and boiling rage about racism and the riots. So there was a lot of passion there, but it wasn't the passion we were expecting. If we had thought this was going to be a kind of Tony Blair Mark II, sunlit uplands, we're all going to marvellous place. Here's what New Jerusalem feels like. Here's New Jerusalem on the streets. And its architecture, that is not what we got. We got exactly the opposite.
Much as I hate to differ with you, I didn't find it negative. I actually found that fire, that honesty really encouraging. I actually found it quite positive in a weird way because it was realistic. He was taking the challenges that we face as a country and saying, do you know what, I can't ignore them, and that's why it's going to be tough, but this is the vision. Do you think he gave us that story?
It was stimulating, but I would say this was the speech of an agonised father with a dark imagination. It was brimful of words like brittle, false hope, failure, danger. It was. If you look at the words and the way it was constructed, this is somebody who has deep fears about this country, who has got the dogged determination to try and turn it around, and I applaud that, and I'm with him every step of the way. But it wasn't a sunny speech.
No, but would it have been odd to give a sunny speech, given that, frankly, as we've been talking about for months, public services are on their knees, the fabric of the nation is frayed. I mean, it would be odd, wouldn't it?
Rachel Reeves' speech yesterday was sunnier, was definitely more positive in tone. And I was watching Keir Starmer's face in comparison to Rachel Reeves' face, because obviously yesterday, we talked about it, she was physically smiling. You could hear it in her voice, you could see it on her face. Starmer started off by smiling, but that smile very quickly, it didn't fade as such, but it turned into a look of, I would say, intensity. It was a very intense speech. And I think there was positivity there in the sense that there was a focus on where we are trying to get to. He actually used the phrase light at the end of the tunnel, which is something that we've been talking about conceptually. He needs to point out that there will be a light at the end of the tunnel. But he used it in the context of, if we do all of these hard things, that's how we get to the light at the end of the tunnel. And it was the first time, it was interesting because there were a lot of phrases there that will be very familiar to people who've been following Starmer. Tough choices, politics of easy answers.
Country first, party second.
Yeah, we heard that, yeah.
Rebuild, lots of rebuild was repeated many times, built together, built to last. But it was kind of the first time that there has been a story, I guess, of here is where we are now. Here are the tough choices that Labour is making, and we are making them in the hope that, 1, we'll fix the finances, 2, we'll fix the foundations, 3, we'll be able to rebuild. That's where you get to the sunlit uplands. So it was more sequential, I guess, than some of the narrative that we've had so far.
Andrew, I managed to grab a couple of minutes with David Blunkett, Lord Blunkett, after the speech, and he felt, unluckily perhaps for Labour, that it's very hard for them to tell a story before we've had the budget. He says everything hinges on the 30th of October. Do you agree with that?
I do think that's right. And I think if there was an underlying message of calm down, patience behind the speech, that's exactly the right one. Because this is going to have to be a show, not tell government. If it's successful, it will be successful because people have noticed actual changes to their daily lives, to the way their schools operate, to local waiting lists and so on, not because Keir Starmer gets up and cheers us up.
One of the things that stood out for me, and it certainly fired up the audience, I think I counted 4 or 5 standing ovations, was this section that he did on immigration.
I will never accept the argument made not just by the usual suspects, but by people who should have known better, who said that millions of people concerned about immigration are one and the same thing as the people who smashed up businesses, who targeted mosques, attempted to burn refugees, scrawled racist graffiti over walls, Nazi salutes at the cenotaph, attacked NHS nurses, and told people with different coloured skin, people who contribute here, people who grew up here, that they should go home? No. No.
It was the strongest that I recall a Labour Party has been on immigration.
Well, I went back for the new Statesman and looked at the speeches given by Harold Wilson, the new Labour Prime Minister in 1964, and Tony Blair in 1997. And the passage about racism and immigration was quite similar to the passage delivered by Wilson. Wilson was of course, in the context of Enoch Powell and the National Front marching and Rivers of Blood and all of that. And he felt at the time the Conservative Party was teetering towards racist views, and he was strong. But if you're looking for uplift, I was incredibly motivated. I thought it was a very, very powerful, passionate, moving and exemplary piece of prose from him.
Yeah, I found the passion there, and the distinction between the millions of people who are maybe concerned about immigration and the minority of racist thugs, is what he called them, who rioted on the streets over the summer. And there was a sense of, don't let these individuals speak for you. I think he actually used words to that effect, and it got very angry and passionate and quite cold when he said, we reject them, we reject that, and essentially that's not what Britain is. And that was kind of the strongest rebuttal of the conflation between the violence and wider immigration concerns that I've seen. I don't think any Labour politician has been bold enough to quite make that connection in those terms until now.
No, I think that's very well said. I mean, he is a tough nut. And I know a nut doesn't have hard edges, as it were, but he's a tough nut with hard edges. This is somebody who believes things very, very strongly and very fundamentally. I was interviewing Angela Rayner just a few moments ago, actually, and she said, this is the Keir Starmer I meet every day and you mostly don't see. He's somebody who won't be deflected, who won't be distracted, who's quite methodical and knows where he's going, but has an underlying passion and an underlying anger that you rarely see. Well, we saw it today.
Well, I'm quite jealous because I too, having seen you interviewing Angela Rayner, tried to get her as she came off your show, but was manhandled by her protection officers. So sadly for me, no interview. But I did actually speak to Wes Streeting, who said something very, very similar. He said, yeah, this is the guy we see every day, the fire in his belly, as well as kind of that softer family side that we heard, and some humour as well. I mean, there were some really quite tender moments in there, weren't they? Particularly talking about his brother who had learning difficulties, who his father had to remind him all the time, Keir, he's achieving just as much as you. And then his sister, who worked in social care.
That's right.
And that line about he wanted social carers to command the same amount of respect in this country as the Prime Minister.
This is a man and this is a family who have had it hard. When he talks about working people and making life better and more tolerable for them, he knows what he's speaking about.
It's also just not something you could imagine from any of the last couple of Conservative Prime Ministers, which isn't to say that they didn't care about working people, but you can't imagine Rishi Sunak or Boris Johnson or Liz Truss giving a speech like that or saying that about healthcare workers or social care workers. I would like to see more of this from Labour going forward, is putting unpopular decisions that they have either already made or are going to make in the context of what they're trying to do.
Yeah.
Whether that's, you can't say that you want tougher law and order if you won't have a prison near you. You can't say that you want cheaper, cleaner energy if you object to electricity pylons. And interestingly, the framing of the winter fuel payment decision, and we've all talked about how the rollout of that, whether you agree with the decision or not, the communication has really been very damaging for Labour. But I think he spelled out it was a decision that we're making to fix the public finances in order that we can have more investment, better public services, so that life will be better for pensioners. Now, I'm sure lots of people aren't going to agree with that argument or are going to pick holes in whether or not it was necessary or not, but it was the first time that you've seen we did this in the context of something more positive that we're trying to do. And I wish they had come out with an argument as compelling as that when they announced it in August.
What's the significance, do you think, of announcing this so-called Hillsborough law? So this duty of candour. We've seen it time and time again in recent months, sadly, with the post office scandal, with infected blood
scandal, yeah.
To announce that in Liverpool, though.
Very, very important. The 97, the memory of Hillsborough is incredibly potent in this city. If you want to buy the Sun newspaper in Liverpool, you mostly can't even to this day. It's a very important law.
Yeah.
It's something that Theresa May wrote an entire book about, in effect, which is all the times the state has institutionally, at different levels, let down large groups of people and failed to give them justice. And the answer, it sounds a bit, woolly, this duty of candour. But if every public servant, every doctor, every administrator in local government and elsewhere has a duty of candour, a duty to tell the truth when asked about things, that could begin, perhaps, to change the rather hostile public atmosphere we've had in this country for far too long. And
in a terrible 24 hours where we've seen effectively war, do we use that word, break out between Israel and Hezbollah and Lebanon. It was a speech obviously largely based on domestic policy, but there was mention of Ukraine and also the wider Middle East conflict now.
John Healey wasn't on the platform or wasn't in the hall because he has shot down to London for a Cobra meeting about the 500 dead in Lebanon. And there is a real worry at the top of government that having in effect won the war against Hamas in the south, the Israelis are starting a new war against Hezbollah in Lebanon, and that has a potential to spread very, very fast. And of course, the Prime Minister himself is shooting off from this conference to the United Nations General Assembly in New York, when he's going to be talking about missiles and Ukraine. We're all enjoying, we're all talking about the domestic issues here, and rightly so, but we should never forget that on his shoulders is a lot more than that.
That is close to it for our coverage in Liverpool. I would say one of the most positive things over the last few days has actually been meeting some of you guys, some of our listeners and viewers, and it's been so fun, people coming up and saying hi. So thank you very much. I did promise to give a shout out to Danny from Sidcup. I've seen him 3 times, and every time he's full of praise for the podcast, so thank you very much.
And I promised to give a shout out to George, who's a podcast listener, who gave me 2 ibuprofen just before Keir Starmer's speech, without which I could not have got through it.
Thank you for watching. If you like this, please hit the like button and hit subscribe so you don't miss a future episode.